Senator Cullinane.
Thank you, Lasco Hurley. I cannot, as is custom in these situations, commend the author of the bill for bringing it forward. I spoke to the author of the bill prior to this debate, because I genuinely feel that this piece of legislation is abhorrent, it's unhelpful, and it's beyond me how any Oireachtas member would put their efforts into criminalising workers, which this bill does, and the Senator disagrees, but I will, in my own contribution, show how it does. He also says that it does not and will not prevent any workers from being able to withdraw their labour. But yet, when you read the bill, it says it would make it an offence, a criminal offence, for a person to engage in industrial action which causes an interruption to the supply of a critical utility. Now, by their very nature, ESB workers, if they were to withdraw their labour, could cause an interruption to services. So if we were to accept this bill, it would essentially prevent a group of workers in the ESB from being able to withdraw their labour. That's the reality, and I think it is an odious piece of legislation, to be quite frank. And let there be no doubt about it whatsoever that this bill would criminalise some sections of workers, because the language in the bill is self-explanatory. It states quite clearly, and I quote from the bill, "It is an offence for a person to engage in action." It talks about fines, indictments, prison terms. All of that I would characterise as criminalisation. It also says, "or to induce an employee of a critical utility to do anything which directly or indirectly causes an interruption or stoppage to the supply of a critical utility." The punishment, the fine, the deterrent for such behaviour can be either 12 months imprisonment and an indictment, a fine of 250,000, or 5 years imprisonment and a fine of €50,000. Is that not criminalising workers? I fail to see how that would not be in any way anything other than criminalising people if this bill was passed. I don't believe that such right-wing, Thatcherite, oppressive and anti-labour policies have any place in this country. These are the type of policies that we saw brought forward in Britain in the 1970s. The plan back then, as we know, was to crush unions, was to demoralise workers and to break organised labour. And this was done, as we saw, by recourse to the law, to courts, the police and prisons. The Criminal Utilities Bill 2013, in my view, is a replica of the anti-union legislation that was passed at that time. But the reality is that this is not Thatcher's Britain, and it is not Britain in the 1970s. It's Ireland in 2013, and it's 100 years after the 1913 lockout. Now, I'm certain that the Senator here who proposed the bill is aware of history and understands history. But the history that he seeks to identify today with bringing forward this bill is, in my view, the history of William Martin Murphy, and not the workers of Dublin or Larkin or Connolly. It is also clear that some in the business class of today, because this type of bill, as we know, is prompted by IBEC and a number of employer organisations who want this type of legislation brought in, that they can be as vengeful and as narrow-minded and as selfish as their colleagues were in the 1900s. The bill will also make it an offence to induce an employee of a critical facility, as I said earlier, to do anything which might disrupt supply. What does induce mean? Induce, seduce. They mean the same thing. They have a similar sound and a similar meaning. Is Senator Quinn of the opinion that unions actually induce workers in order to get them to engage in industrial action? Is he saying workers are unthinking, that they can't make up their own minds on this issue? The language in the bill is very clear, and I think it is quite clear to workers and the trade unions exactly what the intent of this bill is. Perhaps it is beyond the Senator's comprehension to imagine that workers, and all workers, are thinking human beings who are quite capable of making up their own minds on such matters. They are also rational beings and perfectly aware of the consequences of strike action and industrial action of any sort, because no worker wants to go on strike. A large percentage of workers today, as we know, over 40% earn under €30,000 a year. The fastest growth in terms of those falling into poverty is among the working poor. And we're also seeing a dramatic increase in part-time, low-paid, insecure contract type of employment. You will also wonder why the Senator did not dream up a piece of legislation that would make it a criminal offence for senior management in strategically important companies to break agreements with their workers and their unions. I don't see legislation coming in relation to any of those issues. And that's what the ESB did here. So why else would the workers have contemplated such extreme action as strike in the first place? People don't go on strike for the fun of it. They go on strike because they are being denied basic rights, because the industrial relations machinery has not worked in their favour, and it is a fundamental right to strike, in my view. And that right is recognised, as we know. It is recognised in the International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, where it says everyone has the right to form and join trade unions and the right to strike. The explicit right to strike is also recognised in the EU Charter of Fundamental Rights, which states, and I'll finish on this, everyone has the right to freedom of peaceful assembly and to freedom of association with others, including the right to form and to join trade unions for the protection of his or her interests and to engage in industrial action. It's about solidarity, and it's also about the common good. And I would say to the Minister while he's here that as we are in the anniversary of the 1913 lockout, and we have had several debates on the order of business for you to come into this House to discuss what form of collective bargaining rights the government is going to bring in, I would just remind the Minister, in the context of this piece of odious legislation, the workers still don't have the right to be represented by their trade union and collective bargaining in the anniversary year of the lockout. And I very much look forward to whatever legislation the Minister is going to bring forward on that issue, and we can debate that in the time ahead. But I very robustly argue against, stand against, and would vote against if it was pushed to vote this piece of legislation which has been introduced here today.